But the second thing that Steve Jobs had that is remarkable is, if I was being less polite, I'd use a different word, but he had courage. He was more than anybody willing to act on his instinct without all the backup information that most of us require before we bet the company. So if you think about it, Steve Jobs bet Apple over 3 times. When he launched the iPad, it was a computer company. Took an incredible risk, and it succeeded. A few years later, he bet the company on the iPhone. Had that failed, it would have taken down the company. Instead, it made it one of the largest technology companies in the world. And then most recently, he bet on the iPad. I bought an iPad despite the fact that I had no idea what to do with it, because it was just so cool. And I now have an iPad 2. It's my second iPad. I'm discovering as I own it why I own it. Talk about brand engagement. That's a pretty powerful relationship with a brand. So what we're trying to do is provide people with rigorous tools to capture those 2 advantages that Steve Jobs has, which is great intuition, great understanding of what's happening at a non-conscious level, and the courage to act on that intuition by providing people with real rigorous data. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but how many people see in this picture a big face, sort of like Shakespeare? Just raise your hand. And how many people in this picture see a woman in a mink stole walking down the street? Obviously, both are there. If you can't see them, the big face is kind of framed here by the tree, and the woman is framed here. So everybody see both now? I've used this exercise for 3 years. I still see the big face. So again, an illustration of we see what we want to see. We see the world the way we see the world. Here's my homage to Steve Jobs. So there's a tool called latency response. It's been around forever. It's actually been driving the social sciences forever. It is incredibly well accepted that it does measure what it pretends to measure. And the reason we have chosen to do a lot of work in latency is it allows large samples. And the really interesting part of data analysis is comparing different populations. And you can only do that with a large sample. So we just finished a project. We actually haven't finished it. We're in the midst of a project for a consumer magazine with a very, very large circulation base. And the editor-in-chief gets letters from her readers. And these letters are remarkable. And they basically say, if you ever stop publishing your magazine, I would kill myself. And then we did some traditional research, some focus groups with non-readers. And they basically said, I've never heard of your book, and I couldn't care less. And so the editor-in-chief was kind of upset. And she was wondering, are these letters representative of the 3 people who wrote her? Or are they representative of a lot more people out there? Just don't know. So to the point that Dr. Solomon made about engagement, how many of my readers really, really are engaged with this publication? So we did some research using latency, and basically what we did is we pre-recruited people who were engaged readers by just asking them a very simple cognitive question on a scale from 0 to 10. How do you feel about this magazine? With 10 being I couldn't live without it, and 0 being I couldn't care less. And we picked people who gave it an 8 or above. And we compared their response both consciously and non-consciously with what we called casual readers. And it was those differences that really drove the insight of how do we turn more casual readers into engaged readers. So what is latency? Latency is a very simple idea, is if you gave me the choice between chocolate and coffee and asked me to make that choice almost instantaneously, less than a second. For me, it's a really simple choice because I adore chocolate and I actually don't drink coffee. So my subconscious or my non-conscious can make a very instant reaction of you're making me or asking me to make a choice between something that I like and something I don't like. That's not that hard to do, and I'll do it very quickly. If you ask my wife the identical exercise, it actually would take her a little bit longer because she loves them both. And so you're asking her to choose in a Solomon-like way between two things that she really likes. And so the reaction time will be slower because the brain will take a little bit longer to figure out which of those two solutions it's going to pick. And finally, if you ask somebody who hated them both, I've not met anybody who doesn't like one or the other, but if there was such a person, it will take them longer as well because now, just like my wife, you're asking them to choose, forced choice, between two things that they don't like. So what we do is, over a lot of sample, ask people to make a lot of these choices. And what we're capturing is the absolute choice they're making as well as the time they make it. The shorter the better. And you're really tapping into the non-conscious because these choices are, as I said, are less than a second long, and the reaction time is measured in milliseconds. Make sense to everybody? And this is nothing new. This has been around for a long time. Anybody who cares, I'd be happy to send you academic papers that validate that they are actually measuring what they say. So now let me move to new products. Innovation is arguably the key ingredient to transformational growth. I suspect every single person in this room is deeply entrenched in innovation, else you wouldn't be here. It's doing new things better. And we talked to a client of a very, very senior level person at a major cosmetics company, and he said, new ideas are the lifeblood of our company. And in fact, their business strategy is to basically replace their entire line every 3 years. So they think that what drives their success is news, is meaningful news. So here's the dilemma. If innovation is so important, and to get a little bit political, some people could argue that the reason why we're in the economic situation we're in is because we're not as innovative as we have been historically in a meaningful way. This is a fact. 1 out of 10 new products succeeds. And this has been true for as long as I've been around and a lot longer. And success here is defined as is around 3 years after you launch it. So if innovation is the difference between success and failure, and we fail 90% of the time, something's wrong. And yet, in my observation, and I've spent a lot of time launching new products for people like Kraft and for McDonald's, et cetera, is we keep doing it the same way. So we know it doesn't work, but we do it over and over again exactly the same way we've always done it. And how do we do it? Well, we sort of do ideation one way or the other, and then we come up with a bunch of ideas, and we pick 1 or 2 of them, and then we go to focus groups, and then we figure out which of the ideas consumers like, and then we refine those, and then we go to quantitative, and then we might even go to in-market, and then we launch it. There's an irony here in that the reason why we do it that way, and how many people have been involved in new products and done essentially what I just described? And are probably doing it that way now. Here's the irony, is the reason that we do it that way is because in the old days, quantitative research was really, really expensive, and qualitative research was relatively cheap. So the idea was, let's do the cheap research first before we spend all the money on the expensive research. What's happened, though, is it's now exactly the opposite. Quantitative research is almost free, depending on how you execute it. It's a lot cheaper. And qualitative research is really expensive. And so now we're actually doing the expensive stuff before we do the inexpensive stuff. And one big caveat here is there's nothing like qualitative research to inspire insights. What I'm talking about here is evaluating those insights. So we are huge believers in using qualitative early in the process in order to get new ideas and to develop ideas. Less enthusiastic about getting women or men to sit around for 3 hours to talk about something that they think about for 3 seconds.